Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Today we are joined with Rita Reynolds, the Chief Information Officer from NACo. And Rita, over the past year, along with many other county commissioners, other elected officials, appointed officials from across the country, have been working on a topic that I think is going to be something that we're going to continue to talk about for a long time. And it's AI. And how is AI, and I'm sure Rita will get into AI and generative AI and that sort of thing and the differences, but how is it going to affect county government? So what NACo decided to do was put together a task force, and they have come out with a toolkit that was released this past July at the NACo annual conference. So Rita, tell us a little bit about the task force, who was on the task force, how you guys came up with this toolkit.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me this afternoon. Really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of the history, as well as the toolkit itself, and then where we're headed. We have to go back to the spring of 2023. And as many of us are aware, the term artificial intelligence, generative AI, was showing up in news feeds and on our desks. So I had a lot of conversations internally and with other folks about, where does NACo want to go with this? Is this an emerging issue? Is it long term? And the response was, yes, we don't see this going away, and we see it as really industry changing for local government. Maybe we should handle it with our committees. And literally the next day after that conversation with several other folks, we started talking even further, and it came about that we really need an exploratory committee. And so in the May timeframe of 2023, this committee was formed. It consists of 16 individuals from elected officials, county administrator, several county chief information officers. And we started meeting virtually, but then in person, of course, throughout the year. The goal of the committee was to produce first of all, education, helping the committee understand what AI and generative AI are, and then producing a toolkit or a guide for local government. Recognizing that that was a very large task, the committee made the decision to form several work groups. And so I'll get into the specifics of those work groups. However, that did bring about access to subject matter experts in different areas. And so we really made a lot of progress over the year, and I can talk more about that with some of your other questions.
Yeah, so you did break it down into some different sub-work groups, sub-task force. You guys tapped into some vendors, really, that had some expertise. Talk a little bit about who those vendors were and what those subgroups were.
Yeah, and thank you for that recognition. It was very important for us to partner with private industry, and we had and have 4 private partners that became the AI Exploratory Committee founding partners. This included Microsoft, it included Deloitte and Tyler Technologies, and then CAI, Computer Aid Incorporated. Those 4 partners each brought a different level of expertise and knowledge to help the committee explore and understand AI and generative AI more in depth. We also then formed those 4 work groups, and they comprised 4 major areas: ethics, policy, workforce, and applications. Each work group met virtually probably 6 or 7 times throughout the year, if not more, and talked about the ramifications specifically around generative AI, but also around AI as well, and then started forming recommendations, which you will see are in the toolkit as well.
Yeah, so when you start looking at some of those recommendations and generative AI and where are we first going to start seeing it in county government, where are we going to see it initially? Is it in the back office? Is it front office? Is it is it going to help people search websites? Talk a little bit about that, where you're starting to see counties implement some generative AI.
early on, and even now, there is a definite focus with what we would call the productivity applications, which really mostly are the back office. And so those type of areas or functions include human resources, the financial area, IT area, but it crosses over into the other county offices like human services and mental health and criminal justice. Uh, the there's a differentiation that needs to be made between productivity and business process improvement. So for productivity, it's those type of tasks where I'm doing the same thing over and over, and it's taking me a lot of time, or it is so repetitive that why can't I hand this off to someone? And it could be as simple as meeting notes, having the artificial intelligence work for you during a meeting and summarize the meeting minutes at the end of it. It could be taking a chunk of information. Maybe you've written something for an article, but you're not happy with the way it's worded, or you need to reword it in simpler terms. And so that's where generative AI, as we call it, the tool that allows you to put information in and it generates out a response that is potentially easier to understand or more professional. Those are some of the basic areas. And I will add, even writing emails. Some of us have a little bit more difficulty at times writing an email that comes across the way we need it to come across. And so the generative AI tool can help with that. And then I do want to differentiate, if I could take a moment, between artificial intelligence and generative AI. Artificial intelligence has been around, gosh, probably 30 years or more. And it refers to the automation of tasks in the background. I like to explain to folks, think about your Siri, you're talking into your cell phone, for example. Dictating is another area that really artificial intelligence helps with. Those type of functions, even to the point where you have a newer model of vehicle, and now you have access to that digital display. And what's happening in the background is using artificial intelligence to help you with whatever you're navigating, whether it's the car or potentially cameras, things like that. That's artificial intelligence. The generative artificial intelligence is where you ask a question, whether it's verbal or in writing, and the tool gives you back information that is relevant to your question or your prompt, as we call it. And it comes from information that, with the open approach across the internet. We'll talk about that later in terms of some of the challenges, but like to make that differentiation, Steve.
So what are some examples of generative AI that are out there that folks may be familiar with?
Sure. Specifically, the very first thing everyone thinks of is Chat GPT, regardless of the version. The other one that comes to mind quickly is what was referred to as Google Bard, BARD, and it is now called Google Gemini. There are other ones for sure. The one that county government will have access to here in another month or so is the Microsoft version of Copilot. And they like to call it Copilot because it's an assistant. It's generative in nature, and it assists you in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, so you can almost use those tools as search engines to a certain extent, correct? Like some people would be, instead of putting it into your Google bar, you could actually do it through generative AI and maybe get a different response or more detailed response or something like that.
Yeah, it really becomes, I think, a new way of doing your research for sure. And I oftentimes will put the same question in two different generative AI tools just to see what answer I'm going to get back. Because it might be the same, and more likely it's going to be a little bit different variation. And in some cases, it might actually not be accurate.
Yeah, so before we get into those sort of issues, let's talk a little bit about the closed system versus open system, because I think counties, and when we start talking about data accessibility, that becomes a very important topic, because what you put into some of these tools can, if it's open, will be out there. And I have to be very careful about that. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between those two systems.
Sure. What I will start with is that when we talk open in general, which is mostly Chat GPT, is what folks think of immediately, their source is the internet. And that could be everything from publicly available information on websites to Reddit to X, or what used to be called Twitter. And that right there, folks start to question, well, all of the information out there isn't always accurate or correct. So that's one way to view open. The other way I like to explain it is think of your county website. And if I'm creating an open version of using the generative tool, it's going to comb everything on my website. Several counties and even NACo ourselves, we started doing this. And what we would get back asking a question of information on our website could actually be pulling information that could be 10 years old because the maintenance of the data in the background uh, wasn't necessarily kept up to date. New York City, if anyone wants to Google New York City and their chatbot, you will see they ran into this difficulty. The closed environment and the way that NACo and several counties are using now is where I am going to upload documents that I know are current and relevant into my version of either ChatGPT or Copilot, and then the questions get asked against that known set of accurate information. That's a closed environment. It's not necessarily now going out and combing the entire internet. And so you're able to control and ensure better accuracy as well as privacy of information.
So are you saying when you're talking about that sort of data, a Chat GPT version, or would it be like a chat bot on your website that a county may be using for their constituents or those people to look specifically at their website?
Correct. And when I do the county chatbot, it may appear that it's going across the publicly available information on the website, but it actually is referring to a subset that the county has designated as accurate information and relevant information.
And then let's talk a little bit about, I guess, from an employee standpoint, usage of Chat GPT. What are some of the recommendations as employers you're telling counties to do for employee usage of it? You know, like some of the examples you mentioned, you know, editing, things like that. But it's pretty powerful. I mean, I've used it before to write an RFP for something we were doing through our association. Now, I didn't just spit it out from what I got back, but I edited the Chat GPT version, but it generated a 5 to 10 page RFP for me in about a minute. And then I just fixed it and it was ready to go. So what are some other uses internally that you guys are recommending or warning folks about?
Well, I love your example because it truly is a time saver and a great place to start. However, let me start first with a question every county administrator or elected official, or however you want to do it in your county, should be asking of your staff. And that is, are you using any of the generative tools? And if so, how? Talking to a number of counties over the past year, it started out with, we're just not going to allow it. Our staff aren't using it. I'm still hearing, well, our staff aren't using it. And if I were a betting person and wanted to bet on, the lottery or whatever, I would say, yeah, I can guarantee you there's somebody in your organization that is using the generative tools. Might not be on the county equipment. It might be on their personal cell phone. Staff are going to use tools that are going to help them be more productive and get their work done faster. And so you mentioned the RFP piece. I definitely see emails coming across now that are for sure telling me that they've used a generative tool to prepare the email. The other areas that I see are rewriting job descriptions, for example, rewriting what we call user guides that you might have within your department, working on that task of, say, succession planning that you just can't get to. Another example I saw, which was pretty cool, was give me an agenda for this type of meeting. And maybe it was a kickoff meeting. And this came from an elected official, and the individual said, "Oh my goodness, within like 30 seconds, I had a really good agenda. Now I needed to edit it a little bit, but it gave me a starting point." So we are definitely recommending the what we would call responsible usage for staff to be able to explore. Uh, let's not slap their hands and tell them they're doing something wrong, but give employees the guidance and the framework for starting to use and I'll focus on the generative AI tools specifically. And starting with um, keeping it public information even within the county. So uh, don't put private information in there, social security numbers, date of birth. If you're doing, for example, a performance improvement plan, what goes into that? Great question to ask. But say John Smith or Jane Doe, don't use the real person's name. And make sure that you're not including any type of medical information. And then the final piece is, of course, what is it you don't want to be publicly known? So, for example, within technology, I need to write an incident report, for example, for a cyber incident, not a breach, but an incident. I still don't want the public to know about that. So, saying in that tool, let me preface with, if it's a closed environment, then you're safer to say the name of the county. But in the tool, just say pretend county, ABC. So those are some ways. I'm sure I haven't mentioned all of the ways, but it definitely is a productivity time saver for sure.
Yeah, and all these kind of recommendations are in the toolkit we mentioned, right? They're on the NACo website. What do you foresee the future now is of this toolkit? Because obviously this is technology is changing very quickly, you know, faster than you can almost keep up with it. So what do you guys foresee the future of the toolkit being? Is it dynamic? Is it kind of going to be updated every 5 years? What do you see happening?
The excellent question, and one which we already do have a game plan for and a roadmap. Basically, the toolkit is live on the NACo.org website. If you do a search for NACo.org and AI toolkit, you'll go right to the toolkit page. And there is the download of the digital version of the publication. But then on the website, there's also an interactive uh, tabular type page that allows you to say, I'm an elected official. Take me to those sections that I need to really be aware of. And so it'll take you to the benefits, the challenges, the opportunities, some example use cases, and then several, not all of the recommendations, but several of the high level recommendations. If I'm an IT person, you need to see everything. And so it does it in a tabular fashion. We are going to be updating that through the use of quarterly focus groups with the members that were a member of the AI exploratory group and the work groups. And then we're actually in the process right now of finalizing in-person regional forums where we will do a regional educational opportunity as well as idea visioning sessions with that particular region. And we don't have the dates finalized just yet, but when we do, we'll be sharing those out as well.
Great. Well, is there anything else we didn't cover that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I would like to just mention, from the challenge perspective, uh, the committee was very cognizant that there are areas such as accuracy, relevancy, and particularly bias that could be in the data. And we've all said all along, there's always been that type of problem. Generative AI just brings it to the forefront and actually gives counties now the opportunity to be better at cleaning up the data and making it relevant, and then also addressing bias that may be in the data. I will end with the most important piece of this for short term, for sure, is that there needs to be a human in the loop. Where we are 5 to 10 years from now, I know there's a lot of speculation about robots taking over the world. I don't see that happening, at least in our lifetime. Ultimately, you do need the human in the loop.
Right, right. Well, the toolkit is great. You guys did great work. I reference it often to just for myself. I encourage other folks to go out there to NACo.org and download that toolkit and stay tuned. I'm sure NACo will be doing updates. I know we'll be doing updates alongside NACo to our members to kind of keep them updated on this ever-changing technology. So Rita, thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And just let me know if you have other questions or your members have questions as well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.